We are at Emily's house and we are talking about Richard Serra.
Richard Serra is an American artist, and he's still alive today. He's currently 73 years old.
And he went to Yale. Richard Serra went on to participate in process art, which is an artistic movement entirely about the process.
Yes, and he began working with very non-traditional materials such as fiberglass and rubber.
And then from there he went into creating these forms of molten lead, which he would hurl in big splashes against the wall of a studio or exhibition space.
Yes, and this again really emphasizes the strenuous process of taking a molten metal and throwing it against the surface.
And I think this also served as a precursor to showcasing the natural qualities of his materials.
We may relate this entire concept of central process to another well-known artist, Jackson Pollock.
Yes, and in the same way, Pollock's paintings were all about the emotion and the manner in which he applied his paint to the canvas. The importance of the process overshadows the importance of the outcome.
Yeah, and Serra's most well-known pieces are giant, seemingly precarious sheets of metal.
And looking at Serra's pieces, one cannot help but wonder just how these massive constructions stay up. And keeping this in mind, you are brought back to the fact that Serra's art is all about the process, and then one may be surprised by the fact that these sculptures are entirely self-supported.
It's really amazing, and the intimidating size really makes you aware of the relationship between you and your surroundings, making for a very visceral experience. And part of the experience garnered by the viewer is brought about by the way these sheets divide the spaces in which these pieces may be placed.
Yes, and Richard Serra was greatly influenced by Robert Smithson, who was also an artist creating work during this time.
They were site-specific outdoor pieces, and one of the most well-known by Smithson was the Spiral Jetty.
And so now we will be looking at Cycle by Richard Serra.
This piece was made in 2010, and it's composed of weatherproof steel.
The sheets of steel have been formed into interlocking S-shapes, which form a continuous spiraling and circular form.
And as we look at the form of Cycle, we can see similarities between the curving form of the sheets of steel and the form of the Spiral Jetty.
And the spiral jetty is a man-made jetty formed in a spiral, as the name would suggest, and as we saw before. And so not only did Smithson influence Serra concept-wise, but apparently in the manifestation of their forms.
And in order to age the steel, Serra marked the steel with scales, drips, streaks, stretch marks, shadows, calcium deposits, and water stains.
Wow, and this process really is intense and is entirely integral to the importance of the sculpture.
Yes, this piece is over 13 feet high, so it relates back to the whole intimidating size thing of his other works.
And while this piece is simply another addition to the rest of his portfolio, it works to emphasize the gravity of the materials being used.
Now, we may be wondering why this piece was constructed commentary-wise, but to look for a meaning we have to venture back into Serra's initial pieces that were constructed in the late 60s.
The political climate of the 60s was one which encompassed not only a war overseas with Vietnam, but also a war at home between proponents of segregation and those fighting for their civil rights.
And so we look at Serra's pieces, which are all about gravity and weight and process, and we may compare it with the gravity of racial and international tensions and the process of leaving war and uniting a nation.
And nowadays we may not think that that is even a prevalent problem anymore, but there is still tension between many groups of society, and there is also plenty of gravity which comes from preserving international relationships in an ever-changing and very fragile economy, which may very well impact not only a nation's stability, but also their ability to balance peace and safety due to the ever-prevalent need to hold monetary balance of power.
Yeah, and so now that we've fully established the commentary aspect, we must also state that Serra's pieces are fully interactive.
And as we stated before, the part of the importance of Serra's pieces was the awareness it gives you of your surroundings.
Yes, and without the ability to walk in and around the sheets of metal, I don't think you'd be able to get quite the same experience in the end, don't you think?
I mean, I think you still might be able to get the same experience even if you aren't inside of it per se.
Well, I suppose that's true, but you must admit that the strength of the whole piece is in fact due in part to the ability to walk amongst the structure and to fully be immersed in it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I really do agree. To truly appreciate a Richard Serra, you must allow yourself to be fully enveloped by a Richard Serra.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now that we have our commentary fully explored, we will now have a guest commentator give their thoughts on Cycle by Richard Serra.
All right, so I'm here with Josh Perry to give his comments and opinions on the piece Cycle by Richard Serra.
I believe Richard Serra shows his unique style of art in this metallic figure. I find it very interesting how he has the different circular shapes folded around the middle and how they reflect what's outside. So it kind of has like a two-dimensional aspect to it.
So that was some outsider commentary.
Talking to those who aren't necessarily aware of the true intent or subject matter of a piece is really enlightening when you see how the general public may view a piece.
Yes, and I think it is truly remarkable to see how a piece can affect the public in such a way that it wouldn't anyone else who may have any forethought or pre gathered knowledge about the piece.
Yes, and I noticed that in listening to this commentary, you may notice that our guests made no mention of the fact that the sculptures are in fact interactive.
Yes, and I think from that we may take that knowing that these sculptures are interactive and that you can be right up next to them and get the full visceral experience of being right there with these intimidating sculptures is really integral to the final opinion you may get of a work by Richard Serra.
And that concludes the Smart History.